Hi, good evening. Welcome to Healing Journeys live session. So tonight I wanted to talk to you about mold and specifically the link between mold and leaky gut. So this is not something that is talked about often in terms of gut issues, especially if you're seeing a conventional medicine practitioner. They're going to be screening using their tests, but they're not going to be looking at other hidden stressors of the gut. And let me tell you, mold is one of them. So I'm talking to you about mold today because I have recently moved, and finding a place without mold was actually a huge mission of mine, just because hidden mold can be such a big impact in terms of your health. And so without further ado, let's talk a little bit more about mold. So mold is not always something we can see. So obviously you can see mold if it's on your food, and you may notice mold if you're in a really obviously decrepit, moldy apartment. But sometimes mold can hide. And this is where you can actually get a lot of health symptoms, whether it be gut issues. It could also be a lot of other symptoms that I'll go over in a moment related to mold, but you don't necessarily see mold. So let's just talk about those symptoms now. So how do you know that you have mold toxicity? Well, without testing, it actually can be really hard, but here are some symptoms for you. Fatigue and weakness, headache, light sensitivity, poor memory, difficulty concentrating, tingling and numbness in your extremities, increased urinary frequency, appetite swings, abdominal pain, and bloating. So that's where I come in with the gut health stuff, sinus congestion and a chronic cough, and static shocks. So wide range of symptoms. So oftentimes mold can be hidden behind walls. So case in point, I actually had a flood in one of my apartments, and I moved out of that apartment because I was like, there is no way I am living with mold. Absolutely not. And so I found a place that I thought was great. And I started having some health issues. And for me, it was actually difficulty sleeping. So I wondered if there was just bad energy in my bedroom. I moved my bed around a zillion different ways to maybe find my head facing a different way, and perhaps that would help with sleep. But my health actually continued to decline significantly in this apartment. And it wasn't actually until I moved out of the apartment that I started to realize what was going on. So there had actually been significant water damage behind the bathroom wall. So water was leaking from the floor above me to the floor below me, but behind the wall. So I didn't necessarily see the mold itself, but what was happening is the spores were getting into the air and they were causing issues. So mold can cause issues for a couple of different people. So obviously they cause issues with everyone, but there's a certain group of people that are more susceptible. One is that if you have tick-borne illnesses like Lyme's disease. So if you have that, what often happens is mold will trigger these symptoms, and then you will have a whole host of symptoms because you have Lyme. So they're not actually Lyme symptoms. They're symptoms related to the mold, but you're more susceptible because you have Lyme's disease or another tick-borne illness. The second thing that can be problematic is if you have a genetic susceptibility. So actually 25% of the population does not have the genes that code for the enzyme responsible for breaking down mold. So if these people get mold exposure, what's going to happen to them is that the mold is going to start to proliferate or grow on any mucosal lining in the body. So that's why you're seeing symptoms related to the gut, because it's growing on the mucus in the gut. You can also see symptoms related to the nasal and the lungs because the mold toxins or the mycotoxins are growing there. And so this is actually, for those people, known as a chronic inflammatory response syndrome, or CIRS. If you want more information about this, definitely look up Dr. Richie Shoemaker. He is the lead on mold illness and has actually just got a partnership with one of the hospitals. So I think you're going to see this come out a little bit more. The other source of mold is definitely our food. So I did a lot of research when I was preparing materials around mold, and one of the big factors are grains. So in Canada, at least, and in the States as well, there aren't very good standards around mold toxicity in grains or in any products that are farmed in Canada. And whereas Europe, they have a little bit more strict guidelines. And so in North America, you tend to see foods that have higher mycotoxins, which again cause health issues. So these are things like grains, which I've just talked about. Also, coffee is a big one. And there are obviously some foods that you can see mold on. And so that's why when I talk to people about clean eating, I often say eliminate the grains. And one of the reasons is because grains can go moldy. And if you have this susceptibility, then it's just feeding the problems that you have with your gut. The issue with healing mold is most definitely removing yourself from the place that is moldy. And that can be a problem for people. It's a huge pain in the butt. You also want to check for moldy furniture. So I actually came across some furniture that I didn't realize had hidden mold on it. So that was another source of mold exposure for me. No idea how this mold got there. It was an older piece of furniture. But again, just another example of how these things can be hidden in our environment that we might think is a healthy environment, like the case of me moving to a new apartment, when in fact they're not healthy at all. So removing yourself from the moldy place or mold remediation can be another option, albeit an expensive one. But healing usually isn't possible if you still have that mold exposure. So you're constantly kind of triggering the body. So you need to remove yourself from that space. So this is huge. So if you have a moldy environment, definitely you need to remove yourself from it. So when we talk about hidden mold, ERMI testing, ERMI testing is one way that you can determine if there's mold in the house. You can also hire professionals. For those of you in the GTA, I do have contact information. Feel free to message me below and I will add it to a reputable person that can come into your home and test for mold. So that is a great way to find out, hey, I don't see mold in my house, but it might be there. So when we dive a little bit deeper into how that impacts the gut, so the mycotoxins in the mold, that's the most common kind of symptom causing thing. And they reduce beneficial bacteria and also promote the growth of pathogens. So right away, they're causing dysbiosis in your gut. What they also do is they affect the tight junctions. So these, again, to go over that, I've gone over it in past videos, are the kind of little links that hold the cell walls together in your intestinal lining. And so the mold toxins will affect these proteins. Then we have leaky gut. So food is getting through the gut lining and circulating into the body, causing significant inflammation, causing lots of other issues, potentially autoimmunity, a ton of other things going on when leaky gut happens. So that is also a problem. And so even if you remove sensitive foods, if you're not seeing changes, say, hey, Jody, I'm eating a clean diet, I'm not seeing any changes, then you might want to think about other causes of leaky gut, and mold is definitely one of them. Mold also generates reactive oxygen species. So these are going to cause oxidative damage to your intestinal lining, and again, impact that intestinal barrier and allow things to go into the body, causing leaky gut. And they also impact virulence factors in parasites. And so lots of things are going on there. How do you get rid of it? So we talked about leaving the moldy environments, but even if you leave the moldy environment, you may see a reduction in symptoms, but your symptoms may not improve completely. And that's because you actually have to take binders to bind the mold and escort it out of your body. So how do you tell if you have mold in your body? Well, there are a couple of tests you can do outside of looking at the symptoms that might give you a suggestion. However, if you've had mold exposure, it's highly likely that you have mold in your body and you're going to have to remove it. And so definitely removing it using binders. You also want to do probiotics. And again, eating clean, although it may not fully clean up those gut issues, eating clean is going to help you when you're going to repair the leaky gut. So if you have any questions about binders that I recommend, please message me. If you have any questions about mold, please message me. And so this is just another factor that could be contributing to your gut issue. So definitely want to make sure that you have it on your radar. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a lovely evening.